So, Voddie Baucham. Like I said, we've covered this guy before on the channel. And this is another one of the highly stylized clips from the Reformed Wiki YouTube channel. And I think the best person who's covered Voddie on the platform so far has been Prophet Azad, but I'll do my best. So, what is this video about? Well, normally when we talk about Voddie, or not Voddie, Voddie's the guy dating Ken Ham's daughter. No. When we're talking about Voddie Baucham, normally he's hitting us with some hard-hitting theological. That's about as far as I can get there with a straight face, because quite honestly, he's kind of a gish galloper when it comes to theology. But let's go ahead and take a look at this video from Reformed Wiki, which is about Barack Obama being a dangerous cultural Marxist, from Voddie. And people wonder why I got into covering politics. It is almost inescapable when you deal with shit like this. Again, highly stylized.
I started writing about cultural Marxism in the in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Somewhere around 2005, 6, and 7. Blogged about it intensely in 2007 during the election because of what I saw as the incredible threat of Barack Obama.
Okay. All right. So maybe we should go ahead and begin with what is cultural Marxism. Because before we can go any further, we have to define our terms. So when you look at cultural Marxism, the first thing that comes up is a Wikipedia article, which is actually a pretty decent sign. It's better than getting something from InfoWars or something like that. So what is the first thing we get here? The cultural Marxism conspiracy theory. All right. Let's dive in. Cultural Marxism is a far-right anti-Semitic conspiracy theory which claims that Western Marxism is the basis for a continuing academic and intellectual effort to subvert Western culture. The conspiracists claim that an elite of Marxist theorists and Frankfurt School intellectuals are subverting Western society with a culture war that undermines the Christian values of traditionalist conservatism and promotes the cultural liberal values of the 1960s counterculture and multiculturalism, progressive politics, and political correctness, misrepresented as identity politics created by critical theory. Now, what is critical theory? That is, in very short, a lens through which we can look at things to determine if there is a way to move them in a more socialist or even a Marxist bent. So that at least one thing in here is neat. But let's go ahead and kind of dissect that alone for a second. I don't have enough time to go into the Frankfurt School or any of that stuff right now specifically, but let's talk about counterculture and multiculturalism. Well, multiculturalism is a thing that America just should have baked into its blood, given that we are a melting pot society. Progressive politics. I don't think I need to define that in any way, shape, or form. Progressive politics should include things like rights for gay marriage, women's rights, things like egalitarianism, things like trans rights. These are all things that we should, pretty much accept in progressive politics. Political correctness. There are arguments in favor and against mandated political correctness, and I can understand those, but in general, political correctness is just the idea that when you are speaking, it could be, assume you are speaking in mixed company, which means that if I say a black joke, there's a chance that there's going to be somebody in my audience who is black. And if I say that thing, I might hit on something for them that is very negative. And at that point, it is not on them to figure out why what I said offended them. It is on me to accept the fact that I have hurt another, being around me. And of course, there are ways in which you can apply political correctness to go too far, where you have gone into the realm of just absolute censorship. I understand that, but for the most part, it is not the most negative thing in the world. While the theory originated in the United States during the 1990s, it entered mainstream discourse in the 2010s and was promoted globally. Today, the conspiracy theory of Marxist culture war is promoted by right-wing politicians, fundamentalist religious groups, political commenters in mainstream print and TV media, and white supremacist terrorists. It has a source here. The alt-right's discourse of cultural Marxism, a political instrument of intersectional hate, from the Atlas Journal. So if you guys wanted to look at that, you could. Scholarly analysis of the conspiracy theory has concluded that it has no basis in fact, and no intellectual movement by that name exists. The cited sources here are Cultural Marxism, Far-Right Conspiracy Theory, and Australia's Culture Wars, as well as Who's Afraid of the Frankfurt School? Cultural Marxism is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, from the Journal of Social Justice, archived in 2020, the year of our Lord Rona. So, how did cultural Marxism begin as a thought, where all of this stuff was just kind of jammed into a thing? Political correctness, identity politics, multiculturalism. How did all these things get turned into evil so quickly? Well, if you do a little bit of research into cultural Marxism, it actually began not as a cultural Marxist conspiracy theory, but as the cultural Bolshevist conspiracy theory, which is where the anti-Semitic roots lie. And that conspiracy theory is, of course, one of the things that the Nazis were proponents of, and it's what led them to their eugenics movement, trying to literally make sure that Jews were culled out of society. That is why, when cultural Marxism is noted as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, that's where that comes from, because it began as the cultural Bolshevism conspiracy theory. Now, if we continue with the video itself, now that we've gotten some terms out of the way, which of course it was a smorgasbord of terms we had to deal with, because there was so much shit there.
Who was a massive cultural Marxist.
So Obama was apparently a massive cultural Marxist. Well, is there going to be anything important for us to look at here? Let's see.
And in my opinion, then and now, a dangerous man.
Okay. Well, I agree that Obama was a dangerous man. Something to do with the fact that he is a liberal and actually supports things like capitalism right now in their current form, not doesn't seem to want to be reforming those things very much, as well as outside of an abstract principle, we can at least count a lot of drone strikes under Barack Obama's belt. So I can agree that he's a dangerous guy. I can agree that I don't like him, but let's I think my and Voddie's reasons will be very different. His relying on a conspiracy theory, and mine relying on, actual deaths that have come from this man's hands.
On a number of fronts and for a number of reasons. And so
a number of fronts and for a number of reasons, but is he going to articulate any of those?
Yeah, I ended up, some of you may have seen an interview that I did.
No, Chris Dugan. I am not a fan. I would rather have somebody who actually supported my values as opposed to somebody who supports vague values that aren't articulated and then, while in office, doesn't actually do a whole lot for people. Now, granted, he did good. He did better than people like Trump, but still.
On CNN before the election, talking about, some of these issues.
What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting. The bottom line on that is people look at this ticket and their fear is that we will have Barack Obama as our president, that we will be moved toward a socialist agenda, that we would have the most...
Now, Obama didn't move us anywhere closer to a socialist agenda. In fact, actually, I would make the argument that Trump got us closer to socialism than Obama ever could. Now, why is that? Well, accelerationism, quite frankly. more people learned through what has been going on in the current Trump administration, dangers of things like laissez-faire capitalism and some of the other things that are extensions of this. And through that lens, I think there are more people now who are willing to accept more radically left values than there were during Obama's administration, where people were a little more complacent. I think Trump's presidency has pushed, granted, while it has definitely pushed more people to the right, further right, it has also very certainly pushed more people to the left, whereas I'm sure during Obama's presidency, I don't have numbers on this, this is a feeling of mine, I could be wrong. If I am wrong, please prove me wrong in the comment section. But in Obama's presidency, more people tended to stick within their standard political compass. People didn't migrate as much as what happened during the Trump presidency. So, based on that alone, I think Trump has done more for getting us to socialism. Not that it was a good thing that he did any of that shit to begin with, than Obama did in his 8 years.
Radically pro-abortion candidate ever to run for president to serve in that office. And that is an untenable position for evangelicals. And so they look at this and they're trying to decide this.
So how is socialism... I have to wonder, Voddie, how is socialism an untenable position for evangelical Christians? Jesus Christ was more of a socialist than he was anything else in his time on earth. So how is it that evangelicals could not get behind socialism? Socialism meaning, you know, people owning the means of production, like workers owning the means of production. But, you know, I don't think anybody could make the argument that Jesus would have been a laissez-faire capitalist.
Based on what's best for the nation in the here and now.
I only got to do that one time.
I love that. So this is a 3-minute video that Reformed Wiki got to add. So they get to take the best parts, the best bits of this speech from Voddie. And so far we haven't gotten anything like truly substantial, and we're about halfway through. I mean, we've gotten a lot to criticize.
So, yeah, that was pretty much it. The lady said after the interview was over that, yeah, we'll have to have you back. And I knew at that moment that I would never be back on that person's show again.
Okay.
And so this is not something.
You could edit out those Reformed Wiki. You have like 3.5 minutes.
New. Why did I think it was an issue at that time? Because of a number of things. Let me give you just a few that I wrote about then and was worried about then, because of the philosophy of cultural Marxism and because of this man's long history with cultural Marxism.
Could you maybe define that? I mean, this video, I did the work of trying to go in and point out this conspiracy theory, pointing out the things associated with this conspiracy theory. I did that at the beginning of this video because I had a feeling, not having watched this video yet, that Voddie was not going to do that, and not only has he not done that, but in the video presented by Reformed Wiki, where they could have provided that in post, because it wasn't live, they also didn't.
Not only from his university days, but even his church. This man sat under an overt Marxist pastor for decades. Jeremiah Wright.
An overt Marxist pastor.
He was not just a cultural Marxist, he was also a classical Marxist.
Okay, so at least a classical Marxist would be somebody who believes that we should be working towards communism, or at the very least is hypercritical of capitalism and views capitalism through a Marxist lens, through the lens of works like Das Kapital. So I could at least take that. That does not necessarily make somebody good or bad, though. Voddie's relying on the standard conservative practice of Marxist being a scare word, of communism being a scare word. And in so doing, in taking that scare word, he's assuming that he doesn't have to do any of the work. He just has to go, this basically what he's saying here if you know what he's talking about, he's saying that this is not only somebody who falls in line with my conspiracy theory, this is somebody who also just happens to actually be a fucking Marxist. But what is he saying to his base? What is he saying to his audience? If you are in Voddie's audience, likely what you're hearing is not what I just said. What you're hearing is, not only is he a Marxist, which is bad, he's a double Marxist, which is double bad. That's what his base is hearing, and I accidentally just hit a button that put us on the best Voddie freeze frame. I have no idea how I hit that button. I know it's not the one that I was on originally. Let me go ahead and save that. It is one. You know what? I'm just throwing this to the first person I have in DMs. I'm sorry that you have to get that. It is double Marxist. It is double Marxism. When you get the double Marxism just right. But let's continue. Now that my speculation, like I said, is that when you are of Voddie's audience, when you are of his target audience, you hear double Marxist when you hear that. You don't actually hear... You don't actually hear that this is somebody who looks at capitalism through a Marxist lens and also agrees with criticism of traditional conservatism, liberal values, counterculturalism, multiculturalism, progressive politics, political correctness, and idpol, with a dash of critical theory. You don't hear any of that because Voddie hasn't given you that. He's just given you the word Marxist twice, and that's scary.
Right. Was an he was not just a cultural Marxist, he was also a classical Marxist. Okay? This man had sat under that teaching.
Would you like
for years?
Would you like to define
years.
those? Would you like to explain why they're bad, Voddie?
Not only had he done that, but
nope. He just moves along. He got his double Marxist whammy out, and he moves along. He effectively. I know I loaded this twice. He effectively did this. It is single Marxism, and now it's double Marxism. I just knocked my thing. But he didn't actually substantiate any of that. He didn't give reasons as to why, nor did he even explain why those things are bad.
His position on certain issues.
Okay.
Like, for example, his homosexual agenda.
The homosexual agenda. Now, let's go ahead and talk about that for just a second. So, it would make sense, considering that political progressivism is one of the things lumped into the cultural Marxist ideology, and Marxism, or the conspiracy theory of it at least, and then Marxism in general usually leads to people having more egalitarian views because we look at things through a lens of class, right? If there's a gay person who's working at a McDonald's with me, and I'm working at the McDonald's with them, I'm not looking at them as they're gay, therefore they're different than me. I look at them and go, no, you're part of the proletariat with me. You're part of the proletariat just like I am. You are a worker just like I am. That means that you and me are on the same goddamn team. Whereas, when people point out things like the homosexual agenda, usually they are trying to divide you into heterosexual and homosexual, because it is much less convenient for people like this to look at things through a class lens, and it is much more convenient for them to look at things through either a racial lens or a lens of sexuality or a lens of gender. Brunches on Sundays.
The most radically pro-homosexual politician that I had ever seen or experienced in the mainstream.
Radical pro-homosexual. So radical that people could get married. That's radical. People could get married. Okay.
His position on abortion and infanticide.
So to the standard evangelical, those are the same words. Those are the exact same words. But much like with he's not only a single Marxist, he's a double Marxist, this is his way of scaring you. This is his way of scaring his base. You can say abortion, and there might be somebody in the audience who's liberal enough, who's left enough to look at that and go, well, that's just women's rights. But then when he says infanticide, now it's a scary word. Now it's a word that's a no-no word. It's a doo-doo word. It's a bad word. And you're a bad person for thinking it. And you're bad for making him say it. Stop killing kids, because it makes him say bad doo-doo words. But in general, this is, like I said, it's just a scare tactic. When I can look at either of these, Occam's razor the infanticide, because this is superfluous. Stick with the abortion, and then just retitle this women's rights to their own bodily autonomy, as is more accurate. Because most people who are in favor of abortion are not pro-abortion. We are pro-choice. There are better options than abortion, depending on what stage you are in pregnancy, to be sure. But should you have the option to abortion? Yes, because what my morality dictates you should or shouldn't do with that child has no bearing on what should be legally acceptable for you to do.
Which was radical on judicial activism, hate crimes legislation.
Voddie, you're black. I hate to tell you this, but if you have a problem with hate crime legislation, with being able to classify something, like a KKK member shoots a black man on the street, this is not just a random murder. The premeditation for this murder could easily have been just that this person was black. That is a classification for a hate crime. You were killed not because, when we look at the premeditation for this murder, this person was not just killed because they had sex with their daughter, for instance, or they stole something. No, they were killed because one of the criteria that put them in available for murder for the KKK member was they were black. They were in a minority group. That is one of the reasons why hate crime legislation is even a thing in the first place, because of the material reality of that. Voddie, I hate to say it, but you're batting for the wrong team. But of course, if I were being the thing that Voddie is actually really scared of, if I were being the Marxist that he is terrified of, then I would point out that, well, Voddie, the reason you're upset about this is because your masters are bourgeois, and my masters are workers. So we find ourselves to be naturally enemies through the lens of class conflict. And that would be very scary to Voddie, because not only does he find Marxists not only single scary, but double scary, he'd be dealing with somebody who can actually fucking define those words.
And I believed and said openly on a number of occasions that I believed this man's presidency would make race relations in America worse, not better.
And yet, it was not under Obama that race relations got as bad as they have. It has been under Trump that race relations exacerbated to the point that they are. Now, granted, they did not get so much better under Obama, though there was certainly a glass ceiling that was shattered there. I love the shattering sound effect Voddie used. A presidency under someone like Trump has certainly made these things infinitely worse than a presidency under someone like Obama. I'm not about to stand this man. I'm not. But if I have to simply put the two on a scale, I don't think race relations got infinitely worse under Obama. In fact, actually, I believe there might be some material way. We can figure this out. Did race relations improve under Obama? I'm not sure what material analysis there would be for here. But let's find out. Because if this is a thing that we can measure, we might be able to even join in a little debunking here. So this is from BBC, BBC News, which real quick, let's go ahead and do our due diligence. Let's do a quick bias and fact check on this. Okay, so while they are a little more biased than the middle, they have a little bit of a left center bias, their factual reporting is high when we look at the BBC News. So this is a source that we can use for stuff like this, because they do have a decently good record of factual reporting, and they do, in fact, have less biased news. So let's go ahead and take a look at what they say about Barack Obama and race relations. And I believe, is this an op-ed? It might be an op-ed. See, he sealed his racial legacy the moment he sealed victory in the 2008 election. A black man would occupy the White House built by slaves, a history-defying as well as history-making achievement. That's just the glass ceiling thing I talked about before. Anything in here? These are veterans of the black struggle. Those remarkable images of Obama making the 50th anniversary of the Selma protest became instantly iconographic. A truly golden jubilee. The when they go low, we go high approach to racists who questioned his citizenship has made Obama look even more classy. Again, this is all just glass ceiling stuff, though. Racial firsts are the kinds achieved by Obama can present a distorted view of history and convey a misleading sense of progress. They are, by their very nature, a singular achievement, a milestone. This is where we might move into some of the other stuff. America's racial problems have not melted away. This is true. His election was also misinterpreted as an act of national atonement for the original sin of slavery and the stain of segregation. Obama did not win the election because he was a black man. It was primarily because a country facing economic crisis was embroiled in two unpopular wars and was crying out for change. Early on, he used the bully pulpit of presidency to assail black absentee fathers, and more laterally spoke out against police brutality, but that record of accomplishment looks rather meager when compared to the drama of hearing Hail to the Chief accompany the arrival of a black man to the presidential stage, which is just a PR thing. Race relations have become more polarized and tenser since January 2009, though smaller in scale and scope. The demonstrations sparked by police shootings of unarmed black men were reminiscent of the turbulence of the 1960s. So, race relations becoming more polarized, but smaller in scope, which would still make them better than what's happened under Trump, where they are, again, still more polarized, but their scope has been fucking massive. Of course, we're talking about Ferguson, which was an issue here. Public opinion surveys the highlight of this racial restlessness not long after he took office in 2009. A New York Times poll suggested 2/3 of Americans regarded race relations as generally good in the midst of last summer's turbulence, and that poll found there had been a complete reversal. Now 69% of Americans assessed that race relations were mostly bad. Okay, so there might actually have been a little bit of truth to what Voddie said. He failed to bring his great rhetorical skills to bear on the Eliminate America dilemma and prioritize the LGBT community's campaign, which, of course, was one of Voddie's criticisms, but that's a good thing. But what about at the end of his presidency? What about then? What do we have at the end? Obama is ending his presidency with some of the highest personal approval ratings. Let's see. Trump's election is end Obama's hopes of being a transformative president, not least because he proposed the rollback of his signature healthcare reform. Okay. So this didn't give us a full scope of this. Apparently, polls showed right during the height of the Ferguson issues that Obama did in fact, or at least that the Ferguson issues did in fact lead people to have a different view on race. But we do have this that was just posted by Titan. Yeah, Pew Social Trends probably better for this. View of race relations are more negative now than they have been for much of the 2000s. Okay, so let's take a look here. So race relations in Obama's first term, or views of race relations in Obama's first term, were generally good. Pre-2000, they were generally bad. Looks like during a lot of some of Bush's presidency, things were considered good. In 2009, they're considered good. And in 2014, specifically, looks like starting with the death of Michael Brown, things de-escalate a lot, but then spike back up until we get into 2016, which is where we get into Trump's presidency and things start looking bad. They still looked kind of bad near the end of Obama's, too. So it's looking like, overall, if we're looking at a net amount, which might not be the most accurate metric, but if we're looking at a net amount, it is potentially that Obama did have a positive influence on race relations as a net. But it does not seem... So it looks like Voddie might still just be wrong at that point. If it's a net, if we're looking at a net amount, then Voddie would be wrong. So unsure the relevance. The relevance here is that Voddie is trying to be hammer on Obama for being a cultural Marxist and whatever other scare words he can use, and said that race relations got worse under Obama. And it's looking like race relations really only got bad under Obama during the last 2 years, but they improved at the very end. Like, generally good the entire time through, up until the last bit. But
an article that I wrote and actually reprinted 2 years later, because I'm not big on I told you so's, but I told you so.
Wait, your evidence is an article that you wrote?
So the presidency would make race relations in America worse, not better. An article that I wrote and actually reprinted 2 years later, because I'm not big on I told you so's, but I told you so.
Okay, so it's not an evidence thing there. But I don't see where evidence of him being a cultural Marxist is, unless you're trying to say that there's a cultural Marxist movement of people who just happen to be political progressives, in which case just call them political progressives. You don't need your scare tactic. You don't need your scare word for us to look at this and go, oh, yeah, no, that. Voddie doesn't seem to know what evidence is. I agree with that in there. But that would be Voddie arguing that Obama was a scary cultural Marxist. Not that he defined that term, and it seemed like it was mostly just him using words that his audience already assumed were bad and scary, and then just made them bad and scary again. So, hopefully that was entertaining for everybody. I'm going to go ram my head into a cheese grater.